All right, how's everyone doing? I'm Rich CELENZA. Thanks for tuning in to the Rich CELENZA Show. WTF are you talking about? So what I'm going to call this podcast today is Where Do You Really Want to Be? And I've done something similar a while ago at the beginning of my podcast regarding people always complaining about where they're at and that they can never get to where they want to be. And I did a podcast even with my girlfriend Rhea regarding tons of people I know that live in the Midwest, more or less than anything. And I could say the East Coast as well, that I run into that. You know, I live in Florida. I've lived in San Diego. I've also lived in Chicago. But I spend a lot of time throughout all of North America. And I run into tons of people who are always like, I wish I could live in Florida, or I wish I could live in San Diego. And I get it, right? And, you know, a lot of times I don't know what holds people back from doing that. And I get a lot of people have jobs, they have their kids in school, they have their family, and all these type of things. I get it 100%. I left at 18 for the most part because I couldn't stand cold weather. So weather and boredom, not saying Chicago's boring by any means. It's great, you know, blue collar, white collar, totally, that type of town. But I just wanted warm weather for the most part, I guess you could say. And a lot of my family members were in the suburbs at this point in time, and the suburbs just weren't my thing. And I did live in the city. Again, just too cold for me to truly enjoy it. I mean, you had like 3-4 months, and the rest you're just freezing your ass off. So and I spent probably, at this point, on the East Coast, New York, Boston, Philly. Can't say Philly as much, D.C., and even Toronto. I've spent, a substantial amount of time there, like years. I guess if you added all the days together, they just have clear skies. Different environment. A lot more, I think, to do on the East Coast than the Midwest. But I'm not here to get into that. But a lot of my friends in the Midwest, I realized over the last, 35, 40 years since I left, is there's always a reason why they can't be happy or get to where they want to be. First, it was college. They had to stay in state. I get it, the parents with the fees. Or they just want to stay near their family. And, they were Chicago guys, so they all want to go to either Northern, Western, Southern, Eastern, University of Illinois, Chicago University, DePaul. The list goes on, UIC. Is that it? UIC? University of Chicago? UOS? Anyways, there's so many universities. Northwestern. So I get it. And then they graduated, and then they interned. They had to stay because they had to maybe stay at home with their parents again. But before you know it, they met a girl. Before you know it, they're getting engaged. So her, now his family's there, their family's there. Now they can't leave again, even though they wanted to move, go to a warm climate, or move somewhere else. Now they get married, and that's usually, I tell people, that would be the time to move. But most people do not, and I think that's the backbreaker. Is right after you get married, it'd be time to dip. I'm going to tell you why. Because once you have children, the game is over. And most people have a child. So now they're like, well, they can't leave the grandparents. Everybody wants to enjoy the kids. So they end up finding a home somewhere. They get their kids in school. Now they don't want to take their kids out of the school. Then they have another child and so on. And then they're always waiting till their kids hit a certain age. Then they're going to move, which they never do. And then their kids end up getting older, going to universities, end up getting married. And now you're a grandparent. You don't want to leave your kids again, then and their kids. So now you have grandchildren. There's always an excuse why you're paralyzed, I call it, and can't go anywhere. And it really shocks me because I have a lot of friends in their 50s now. Now, what they're always talking about is, I'm going to retire in Florida or in California, maybe even Vegas or Arizona. I have a ton of family in Arizona as well. But I always tell them, this is what I've seen over the years, because I've been going to Florida since I was 5 years old. So I was going to South Florida literally since I was 5. And I've ran into old timers, and I still run into them. I still have a lot of family that has condos in South Florida, again, Arizona, and California. And they just live an extraordinary life. I guess the way people kind of look at how I live my life to a certain degree. But with my friends, they're 50, heading on 55, let's say 60. A lot of them, what I don't think, and I tell them this, and I don't think they're going to realize the impact, is most people wait too late to really start enjoying their life. And I see so many people, and I get you want to retire. You got to have in your mind, you got to have this set up. You got to have your, all this saved in the bank, and I have to have this 401k, and I have to have all these things set up. I got to wait till the market's this way. But a lot of people come, I'll just use for Florida, for example, they come 65, 70, 75. I mean, it's no disrespect to the elderly, but how much life do you really have left in you? Energy-wise, too. When people usually come to Florida retired, their energy level is just, it's exhausted. Because for one, they've really worked in, or lived in a very cold, struggling type place. A lot of them had really tough jobs, which is, that's not for me to hear to rip on by any means. That's amazing what a lot of people do. But really, by the time they retire and get to Florida, not only are they exhausted and beat up from where they lived for so many years, now they kind of get there, they're there and they're just older. They're just older, where to truly enjoy like Florida, I'm just using for an example, you've got to understand the younger or the faster you kind of get there, the more time hopefully you're going to have to enjoy all the things it has to offer. But if you're going to come to Florida at 65, 75 years old, what are you really physically able to do? Besides, as you know, they usually go out for lunch and they talk about where they're going to go out for dinner. They may go to a couple casinos. They may go to the beach. They may go, the Bahamas. They may catch a couple cruises. They may go to their local little, hot spots. That could be like if they join a club. It could be a tennis club, a golf club, bocce, whatever, which is wonderful. Which I'm not, ripping on that at all. But if you're somebody who is stuck in your life, and I didn't even mean to get into this long-winded thing regarding Florida, California, and all that. But it doesn't even mean that you have to go to Florida, California, or anywhere. What I'm talking about just in life in general, I think we've been programmed to think we have to constantly be sacrificing for some reason or stay somewhere where we're not happy. And again, I get it. A lot of times you may have a better job opportunity in a certain state that you wouldn't have in another place, or you may not. You'll make more money in one place compared to another. And I get that because I know a lot of people, their finances means the most to them, right? So they live where they think or they have the best opportunity to make the most money and give their family the best life possible. And I understand that. But I do believe a lot of times, especially in this day and age, I can't say back in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, the opportunities now are kind of everywhere, especially with technology coming into play, especially with growth. When you look at, the highest populated places in our country now, which sounds crazy, it's California, right? Texas, now it's Florida, even over New York. The growth in even a lot of places like warmer climates, I'm just using for an example, because this is the one I hear the most, is like Florida's growth is just booming. Now, again, you got to have something to do in Florida. It's not like, I get it if you're you're a stockbroker, hypothetically, or a trader or something, they don't have that in Florida. I get it. So you're going to want to be in New York or Chicago, right? I get it. If you're in politics, you're going to want to be in D.C. I get all those things. But the growth is growing. Arizona, all these different places. And if you want to go somewhere, you can make it. I really do. Like that famous saying with Sinatra, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Well, if you want to leave, your certain situation, and you're miserable, or you feel like you're in prison, because I think a lot of times it becomes a mental prison when you're living in a place that you don't want to be. And I've discussed this with my friends regarding a lot of Chicago, and I'd hate to say it, where regardless how big my friends' homes are, how much money they kind of make after a while is, their homes, a lot of them, then they go in the basement, right? They make their man cave or whatever, and that's where they watch a lot of the sports, or just they have bars set up and parties, which is wonderful. But I've seen over the years with even my, immigrant grandparents and aunts and uncles and things, and that's not a dig on them. They love Chicago. But what I'm saying, what I seen in life was like, say you have this 3-flat where our families lived, and like I said, everybody goes to the basement, and then they pass away, and it's like, while they're in the basement, they're kind of underground, and then before you know it, they get buried, and now they're kind of back to being underground. They just kind of changed locations. But a lot of them never went out and really experimented and they wanted to, different places, or just trying to live somewhere else besides where they were born. And I looked at myself as like my immigrant grandfathers, where they came from Italy. They came to the Midwest or Chicago. I don't think that they both came through New York, obviously. One went to Kenosha, Wisconsin. I think the other one went to the city of Chicago. And, they came from poverty. They came to Chicago to make it, and they did very well. That was wonderful. But when I left Chicago, my family was really against me and really upset with me. But I looked at myself, not as an immigrant, but as saying, listen, I want to go to a place that I want to go to, which is a warmer climate. I probably would have literally, and I'm not exaggerating, would have probably went to Italy. I almost felt, my grandparents used to sometimes say I was born in the wrong country just by what I like to eat, what I like to do, the way I like to sleep, and my personality. And I'd say that's one thing that I feel in my life, is that when I went to Italy, I felt like that was home. Now, let's not get that misconstrued. The United States is my home. That's my country. I'm down with my country more than anything else. I would never, if there was ever a war between us and Italy, I'm never leaving my country. United States, I think, is the most amazing place in the world. I am so fortunate I was born here, and I love that I'm from here. But I also think there's a huge part of me that would like to also live in Italy, where I kind of go back and forth, because when I was there, I just had a calming feeling like this is kind of where I knew I was from. And I was going to actually, when I was younger, go to California. I just didn't really have I didn't have anyone there. My father already lived in Florida. So I came to Florida. And not that Florida's like Italy, or at least my family members were all from the southern part of Italy. So one's from the town of Vasto, beach town, and then the other one is from Aged, which is Naples, basically. So just much warmer climate, more laid-back lifestyle, much different than obviously Chicago. So if you're going to compare Florida to Italy, I'd say it's more on par, not food-wise, but just kind of just a different lifestyle, where Chicago was very cold. Just more of, I would say, of course, there's the city with the white collar, but I'd say a lot of Chicago is built around blue collar. So I didn't feel blue collarish. I felt more, I can't say flamboyant, but I felt like I liked entertainment, modeling, fashion, and all those type of things. Not saying Florida was like that, but it just had a different vibe, especially South Beach. So, but if you are, again, I'm just giving you my opinions on this regarding what I kind of went through. But and again, most of my family members now that stayed in Chicago are very wealthy and doing actually a lot better than I'm doing, hands down. But would I have traded it for anything? I don't think so. I mean, I've been fortunate to do all these other different things. And I did give my kids a different lifestyle. I do feel bad because I love being from Chicago. It was just not a place that I wanted to stay. They're still all my favorite sports teams, and I'm there quite often, probably a month or two a year. Still, my mother still lives there, and a majority of my family members. And they're all very successful. And they like that life. What's kind of funny is they love coming to Florida. And we're all going on a cruise. We're going on a big family cruise, about 40 of us. And they made a lot of wealth, and they can do whatever they really want to do to a certain degree. But they still live in Chicago, where when I lived in Chicago, this was my perception again, and this is just the way I used to think. I can't say I'll always think this way, but when I was younger, I felt like if I was broke, why would I live in Chicago or the suburbs? Why wouldn't I just go to a warmer climate and have fun, right? Or just be in a warmer environment to enjoy myself, because I just like more tropical type environment. And then if I became rich, why would I stay? I would leave because I'd have money now to kind of, now I have the money to go live wherever I want to live, which would be a warmer climate. So no matter what, I always found myself, regardless if I was poor, middle class, or upper middle class, or 1%er, wanting to always live in a warm climate. And like I was saying earlier, very briefly, my daughters, they grew up in Orlando, Florida, which was kind of paradise, I think. And I think now that they look back at it, we go back and forth to Chicago a lot. So on one end, I was kind of sad in that they didn't grow up in Chicago like I did, but they still have the whole family there. But on the other side, I remember my family members were always coming to Florida, and all their memories with their family is really all great memories. It could be going to Disney, Universal, going to meet them at the beaches, South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Sarasota. And they lived a pretty incredible life, I think. Especially they loved Disney, and they caught the heyday with Pixar and all that stuff going on, and a lot of the princesses. So they lived, a really amazing life. And when I talk to them now, I said, what would you like better? And my youngest daughter used to spend her summers in Chicago, and she loved that. And my oldest daughter just didn't relate to Chicago because she had some health issues when she was younger, and it just never worked for her. She never felt good there. So the main reason we had to really live in Florida, and I'm not kidding just to say this, is she just excelled. Whenever she goes to Chicago, she just gets very sick. We just did a wedding there, and it wasn't even that cold out, and she caught strep throat just recently. What was that, in August? So she just, it just doesn't work for her. And I'll tell you, when I travel a ton, and I just recently, if you're somebody too who's like, and I don't even know how I got on this huge tangent regarding what I've gone through with moving or living in certain places, but somebody that I work with who's from Chicago, a great guy, I actually had to take off, and I had to go to Portland, and then I had to go to Oregon, and then I had to go to Santa Barbara. And he had to come to Miami. Even though I live in Florida, I usually covered the Florida area. He had to come to Miami because I was already scheduled. And he hit me up, and he asked me where I was going. I said, I'm heading to Santa Barbara at that time. And then he goes, well, I'm heading to Miami. At least we're going to, warmer states. And I said, as a joke, I said, listen, I live in the warmest state. I says, I'm always leaving my state to go somewhere colder. I go, you're kind of the opposite. You're, for the most part, leaving Chicago. You're usually going somewhere, warmer. So we're kind of on the flip side of that. Not that it's always warmer throughout the Midwest or the United States, but I'm always leaving the warmth going into cold, and then he's usually leaving cold and kind of not always going into warmth, either the same. But I go throughout Canada as well, and I call it going from darkness or light to dark. And I was back in Chicago for a while when I was traveling, and I spent like 8 months back there. 6-7 years ago. I spent some time with my mom, and I stayed with my buddy. And I spent the summer at my buddy's law firm. I just wanted to like reconnect with all my friends and everything. Spent some time there, and I loved it. And my buddy who owns a law firm said, Rich, come and work with me. I said, that's kick-ass. Let's just do that. And I had one of the funnest summers of my life doing that. And what I realized, though, even when I was traveling, when I was working with my buddy at his law firm, I also was doing some other traveling, some other work as well, that I kept leaving, I'd leave darkness and I'd come into darkness. And when I lived in Florida, I realized I would leave, I'd go into darkness, but I always came back to lightness or light. So that's the one thing I always think about. What was my end result? I really realized that when I went to Italy, where I left Italy. It was February. We went to Venice. We went to a lot of different parts. But when we were in Italy, we were all going home, and a couple of my relatives, my uncle and my cousin, were going back to Chicago. It was 20 below. One of my cousins he went to San Diego. I think it was like 60. My uncle was in Vegas. I think it was like 50, and I was going back to 80-degree weather. So I just kept thinking, wow, where would I really want to end up? And sometimes in your life, you may want to think about that too. Where do you really want to end up? So I'm going to wrap it up there. If you get a chance, check out my YouTube channel, Rich CELENZA. I've been going through a lot of different stuff on there regarding fitness and different traveling. I'm also on one of my Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. All right, take care, and if you're traveling, safe travels.